Hello, friends. My name is Anne. I'm one of the mentors here on the Sunlight app, and I am the mom to two children. One is a sophomore in college, and one is a senior in high school. So I am quickly working my way out of this job of homeschooling, and so I just felt like this topic would be a good one. To cover, especially at this season of the year when people are trying to wrap up their school year, thinking about what to do for the next year. What are the concerns that we all have at one time or another about homeschooling? And so I was going to go ahead and start with one of my homeschooling fears, and this was my very first one. And I did also want to mention thank you so much for the great response to my post about this topic, because we had so many people bring up some questions and concerns, and so many, in fact, that we're going to go ahead and tag team this topic. And next week, Amber will cover some things too, just to make sure that we're able to address everything that you all are concerned about. And so my very first homeschool fear is when I just started, and I started at the pre-K level with my son, was am I going to be able to teach him how to hold his pencil correctly? And that was a serious fear that I had, because I am right-handed and my son is left-handed. I have no experience in this whatsoever. So that was my one fear. That was my greatest goal for that whole pre-K year, was that he would be able to do that. And I am happy to announce that he was able to accomplish that pre-K year, and not really in part to anything I was able to help him with, as I am not left-handed, but handwriting without tears gave me everything I need to help him be able to start writing with success. So that was my very first homeschool fear back in the day. Now, that being said, as homeschool parents, there are so many things that can give us cause for concern. And we're going to talk a lot about some different situations and some things that we can do in those situations. But I just want to emphasize that the top thing that we can all do is pray about any of these concerns that we have. And that would be the first thing that we want to do. And then come alongside each other and see how we can help and learn from each other. So thank you all for joining. As I get going, feel free to pop questions in the chat or mention anything of your own experience, just so that we can learn from each other. So my next fear I had, after the one about my son holding his pencil correctly, is one that Lisa in the app was asking about, and this involves writing. Now, when my child was about the same age as Lisa's is right now, I had the exact same concerns. Writing was a struggle. The ability to write down what you're thinking, that was not happening. And I didn't know if that was okay or if it was not okay. So I reached out to other homeschool moms and found out that what we were experiencing was completely normal, absolutely developmentally normal. And you could try any writing curriculum out there, you would end up in the same boat, because it's just something that takes time to develop, the ability to write down what you're thinking as you're thinking it. So the advice I was given worked out extremely well. And that advice was for me to serve as a scribe for him for all of those writing assignments. And because if you think about it, the point of the lesson was to come up with a story or a poem or whatever the assignment was about. And he was doing that. It was just out loud. And so I would write down what he said. And that actually made it easier to be able to give input and talk about, what might come next, and just really work through it together at that young age. And that did work really well. But Lisa is mentioning that her state does require her to turn in some samples, and it might not be the greatest idea to have the sample in your handwriting when it's something that the student has done, even though they really are the ones that did it. But a suggestion there would be to maybe replace your weekly copy work for a little while with recopying that story that he said in the first place in his own handwriting, so that you have some of those samples to be able to turn in. It is true, I have never lived in a state where I've had to turn anything in or have those kinds of requirements, but Amber has. And so next week, she can address some additional tips for things concerning having to turn things in like that. And then Emily in the app, as time passes, she's wondering if her expectations are realistic. And I think that is also something that all of us feel every single year. Are we doing enough? Are we not doing enough? Are we pushing too hard? All of those kinds of questions are there. And I really think that knowing what to expect is actually different for every single child that you have. And I only have two, but I did figure that out pretty quickly, that my expectations honestly were different for both of them. Over the years, I realized that the goal is to see progress when comparing their work and their abilities. Compare from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and think about things like, can they do math that they couldn't do before? The answer is probably yes. Could they, or have they read about different places and different time periods that they had never read about before that they can now tell you about? Have they been able to dive deeper into a topic that that they had maybe just touched on before? Like when you're doing American history, and then you end up with D, you're still covering American history, but it is at a much deeper level. And so you can see the progress as the year goes by. I think during the year, it is more difficult day to day, to see that kind of progress. But when you go ahead and save things that you've been working on, keep that stack of books growing that you've read, and you can see all of that progress. Going back to writing and language arts, I do think that is one of the subjects that we as homeschool parents do struggle with knowing, how much do we push, how much, do we give? And it can also be hard to see the progress sometimes with that particular subject. So if you are doing many of the assignments that are in the language arts, and notice I don't say all of them, I never, ever, ever did all of them. But if you're doing many assignments and you're discussing them and you're learning from them, you will end up seeing progress as time goes by. So back to the student I had that I needed to scribe for. We did that all the way through part of the third grade. And then he was able to write more on his own. So I did see that progress, but it did take, it took more than a year, but it did happen. And fast forward to when he became a fifth grader, he joined the Boy Scouts, and he served in an official officer position. And it's a little bit ironic, but the position is called scribe. And so he was the one that had to take the minutes of things that were happening at the officer meetings and things. And he was able to do it. And of course, there's no way he could have done that when he was younger, but he did get there. And again, I emphasize, I think in the day-to-day, you just feel like there's nothing happening, there's no progress. But when you stop and look from beginning to end, it's a whole lot more easy to see. And another aspect of knowing, how much to do, when to push, things like that, I think you do need to just think about each child individually, think about their strengths and their weaknesses, and determining how much you want to push when it comes to a particular aspect of doing school. Some children are naturally inclined to be more independent. Some need you there every single waking moment. Some are naturally inclined just to give up easily. Some are so determined that they won't, do anything else until, something is finished. And I have honestly seen both ends of that spectrum with my two children. And so you know them best. So you may have different expectations for one child than you did for the other. And I know the immediate thing that comes out of their mouth is, oh, that's not fair. But life isn't fair, and you really are able to do the right thing for each child in your homeschool when it comes to those expectations, and you can find a happy medium with open communication. And I do think it is really important to communicate. Make no assumptions that just because you're thinking it, they are too. Open communication, so essential. And Katrina had a question about how to wrap things up successfully at the end of a school year. And anyone out there besides Katrina and me that has trouble wrapping things up? Maybe things are kind of straggling along at the end. Maybe there are some subjects that are neglected or avoided. Well, if that is your situation, I would recommend thinking about doing a loop schedule. And that means that you basically list all of your subjects that you are going to cover. That doesn't mean you're going to do them all in one day. Now you can have a couple that you do every day. Put them in a little separate list. But the other ones you put in a list, and during your school time, you just go through them. And when it's time to stop school because dinner, because a t-ball game, whatever it may be, you just stop. And then the next day, you pick up the list again and start where you left off. And so nothing ends up getting saved for last every single day in that kind of situation. So a loop schedule can help you not neglect certain subjects. But what if the subject is more of an elective and you don't really have to get to any particular point to finish it? You can just stop whenever you want to stop. And then if you're like me, you might consider outsourcing something completely. I did buy some art curriculum with all these high hopes, that we would get to that. And it just did not happen. It sat on the shelf and it sat on the shelf and it sat on the shelf. So we ended up joining a co-op when my kids were in 4th and 6th grade, and they were able to get some art there, and it actually happened. So that is another option to outsource anything like that if it's something that's more of an elective and you can wait a little while before they get to it. And that worked out great for my two. Now when you get to high school and you have more textbook-based subjects like science and even math, you can call it a credit on their transcript if they've completed about 80% of the book. If you think about it, how many of you that may have gone to public or private school actually got all the way through a textbook? I taught high school biology before I had my kids, and I never got all the way through that textbook. So you don't have to do all of it, but I know you're concerned about, well, what do I cut out? How do I know which 80% to do? I would recommend that you go on your state's website. The education agency, like in Texas, is called the TEA, Texas Education Agency. And you can look up the requirements for every single subject that there is. And you can see that, like in the high school chemistry book that you're using, this topic is covered or is not covered under these requirements for the state. So we can skip that chapter. But you just make sure to do about 80%. And then you've got everything covered to have earned a complete credit. And the same with the math. There may be a couple of math topics that aren't required for that particular subject, but they are in the book that you're using. You don't necessarily have to do all of it. So the other questions I'll be covering today all center around high school, preparing for college, and the transition from homeschool to college. We had a couple of questions about that. Ashley asked about making sure they have what they need in high school to be prepared to go to college. And in her post, she mentioned a transcript and standardized test scores. And that kind of sums it up. And that is what you need during high school to be prepared to go to college is a transcript and taking a standardized test. It is true that many schools don't require those test scores to be admitted to the college, but they are extremely important when it comes to earning scholarship money. So you do want to have your children prepare for those and take them. And the transcript, of course, lists everything that they've taken in your homeschool. So then that kind of leads to another question. Well, what do I put on a transcript? What do they need to take? And how do I make a transcript? Actually, you can use Google to look up transcripts and see some examples, but you can pretty easily just use Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel to make your own. And so back to how do you know what to put on that transcript? You can look at your state requirements for graduation. Typically it's 4 English classes, and that's a super easy thing. They typically call it English 1, English 2, English 3, and English 4. So, for you might have done history, Bible, literature, If you did 100 for your freshman year, then you've got a whole credit for American history, you've got a whole credit for English 1, because that literature part counts for that. So you can see from your state what they require for seniors to have accomplished before they graduate, and you can base it off of that, because honestly, that will be what colleges in your state pretty much expect the kids to have. You can also go to the college website itself, and it will tell you the admission requirements for freshmen, and it will list all those things. So when I was looking my first time around doing this with my son, I saw up to, you got to have 4 math classes, 1 every single year. And some other schools were 3 math classes. So it can depend on where they want to apply. So be thinking about that, where they may want to apply, and make sure you cover those classes so that you meet all those requirements for that. And then back to the test scores. There's the ACT, the SAT, and there is a test that is newer called the CLT, and more schools are accepting that. You can look on each college's website to see which ones they'll accept, and about when to take it. The junior year, spring of your junior year is ideal, because that gives you another chance to take it that summer, and the early fall of your senior year, because the deadline for all of those things, some schools don't have an application deadline, but if they do, it's typically December 1st, and so you want to have your highest test score possible. The other thing some schools do and some don't is accept a super score, which on the like an ACT, for example, there's 4 different sections, and your composite score is the average of all 4. Well, let's say you take the test twice and you got a way higher score on the science part the second time you took it. If a college accepts a super score, they will accept the highest of each of those 4 categories between the 2 tests. And some schools do not accept a super score, but you'll be able to see that on their websites. I actually did a live talk a couple of months ago about high school and covered a lot of these details plus more. So just to save time here today, and I can link that video to the comments when this one is posted again, because we covered a lot of people's questions on the app too with that one. And Christian Family on the app asked about the transition from homeschool to college, and that is definitely something that could lead to anxiety in a homeschool mom, to go from togetherness all the time to all of a sudden being apart for most of the year. It is quite a change. But if your child is wanting to pursue a career that does require a college degree, then remember that this going off is exactly what you've been working towards, all the years that you've homeschooled. I've already made the transition with my son, who's a sophomore now, and he is 2 hours away from me. And I will be making this transition again this fall with my daughter, who will be 6 hours away. And so I've always emphasized open communication about anything, and I think it's especially important during this transition. I will remember the conversation I had with my son about, how often, we might expect to hear from him. And he said, I'll call about once a week. And I said, well, can you please call me the first day? I really want to know how your first day goes. And so, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So talk about these things, because, well, and it turned out that he actually calls way more than just once a week. But I know it's going to be so different with my daughter. Each one is so different. It's going to be a different thing. But knowing those expectations is helpful, because if they really are thinking, well, I'm just going to be doing so great, I'll just talk to you once a month. But if you know that that's their expectation, then, you can deal with it. You can pray about it a lot, but you can deal with it. And if they want to, maybe they want to talk to you more than you want to talk to them. But as long as you understand where each other is coming from and what the expectations are with this transition, because it is obviously a big change from where we have been, being in the same house together all the time. It's also a big transition socially, And I would encourage anyone with high schoolers to go ahead and look into what colleges they might want to go to. Look at what student organizations there are, because most colleges have many, many, many different groups that your students can join. I don't think I've ever heard of a school that didn't have a Christian group, and it's definitely one. The type of thing that you would want them to look into, to be able to be involved with other students that are believers. And that's a great thing to get plugged into. I know a lot of students, when they're younger, play sports. It's not their, it's not going to be their career. They're not going to play college sports, but they enjoy it. A lot of schools have really good intramural teams to join. They're just fun, and you still get to be active and play the sport that you might have played for years. So socially, that's an important transition, to be able to find those groups and things like that when they're away from home. Now, academically, in my experience, there have not been any issues with that transition from homeschool to attending college classes. Being raised on Sunlight, and this is the extreme example, because Sunlight is so different from traditional school when it comes to the history, Bible, literature, because they've never had a test on those things. We've had discussion questions, we've written papers, but a test in history? Never had it. So part of the core requirements for the school, plus he's getting a minor in history, so he is taking a lot of history classes, and so he took 2 his freshman year in college, and never having had a history test in his life, it was not an issue at all. He was able to learn what he needed to learn. He was able to study what he needed to study, and he absolutely enjoyed it and did just fine. So academically, your children will be prepared. One of the things about homeschool with homeschooling high school with Sunlight is having that separate student instructor's guide, where they really are in charge of their schedule, and you can set the limits. You have to have such and such and such done before whatever time, and they're in charge of doing that, and that just lends itself to following that syllabus when they get to school. So that covers the topics that I was going to on from the questions on the app. And like I said, a couple of more did come in last night, and Amber is going to take those and discuss those with you all next week. And above all, don't forget, like I said at the very beginning, these homeschool fears and concerns, pray about them. And we are here for you to share our experiences. And so I encourage you, when this is reposted, if you have an experience about any of these topics, then let us know. Let us know what your experience is, so that we can learn from each other. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.